Listening to the radio the other day, GBNews on the radio, and there are some adverts on some sites where it's basically gambling adverts, but the whole advert is about gamble responsibly because if you don't, this will ruin your life. That's their advert. That's just the advert. Surely this is bad.
Oh, it's bad that all the gambling adverts are basically anti-gambling adverts. Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that might make me lean towards banning them, is constantly being lectured by gambling companies about responsible gambling. People complain about gambling adverts. Mainly they complain about them just because there's so many of them, and they complain about gambling sponsorship in football because so many teams are sponsored by them. That is largely because gambling advertising is so restricted on television. It can't be on before 9 o'clock, and they don't even put them on now in the breaks between and before and after football games. So you've got a relatively limited amount of space and time to put gambling advertising on, and you've got a lot of gambling companies. Over time, the industry will coalesce. There'll be fewer and fewer companies. At the moment, there's a lot of them out there fearing a ban on advertising, which actually encourages them, ironically, to advertise more. But over time, you're not going to see half the Premiership sponsored by gambling companies because it will just naturally. There'll be winners and losers, and the big companies that get their brand well known will succeed, and the other ones will tail off, I think.
Yeah, I just want to quickly, before we go to Carolyn, ask your opinion on the morality of gambling and the economic argument for gambling, because you said sort of what you anticipate to happen with the industry, but what do you think is the right thing? Because you hear the argument with cigarettes and alcohol, for example, which are regulated, and people say, well, actually, if you over-regulate them, you're actually taking money out of the economy. You hear that argument a lot because of taxes. Is there a moral case and an economic case to deregulate or promote even gambling?
Oh, Christopher, I think that was
Christopher, yes, that was you.
Yeah.
That was for you, Christopher.
That was for me, sorry.
Yeah.
Is there a moral case to deregulate it? Well, I mean, I think regulation in Britain, generally speaking, is pretty good for gambling, and we have a thriving gambling industry. It is very important that you do have, I think, branding, sponsorship, advertising, because it's still a relatively new industry, the online industry. And there is still a sort of Wild West out there on the internet that isn't regulated at all. The online industry is regulated much more than people make out. And so it is important that, if you're a gambler and you're going on the internet, you want to know that this is a company that pays taxes in Britain, is regulated in Britain. And advertising and sponsorship is a really good way of doing that, because a company, by sponsoring, for example, a Premiership football team, is saying, we're here to stay. We've got enough money to do this. We are a serious company, not a fly-by-night company. So sponsorship and advertising doesn't just help the gambling companies, it does help the punter. And also, of course, it helps sport. There's a huge amount of money in sport. I'm a big fan of snooker. Okay. It would be devastating for snooker if gambling advertising was sponsorship was banned.
OK, all right, it's time now. Finally, she's just been sitting there looking resplendent with that wonderful hair, but now it's time to actually hear from her. It's Labour MP for Swansea East, Carolyn Harris. Look, Carolyn, I have only put one bet on in my life, and the horse died, which actually stopped me from putting any more on. Do you think that the gambling industry is a bit grotesque and it profits off people's misery?
Short answer, yes. And that is purely down to what Chris won't want to hear, the moral argument. I deal with people who have taken their lives, lost their homes, lost their families, and the regulation that's currently there is based on the 2005 Act. If I tell you the iPhone wasn't even invented till 2007, then you will understand how technology has developed so much faster than legislation have. And the current situation is that the ability of the industry to invade every possible avenue into someone's private life through the phone, through emails, through advertising, it is dangerous for those who have a problem with gambling. It is encouraging those who are vulnerable and susceptible to have a problem with gambling. Yeah. And it is destroying society in the sense that people are spending more than they can afford. Their lives are being put at risk.
Yeah. And I just want to ask you, actually, because when we think of gambling, traditionally it was sort of going to a betting shop and placing a bet on the horses or things like that. I remember when I was younger, you had these coin machine things that you put a penny in and you wait for all the other ones to drop. Relatively harmless thing. But what I found recently is that games, video games and phone games for children, they're encouraging them to buy, blocks or like coins to use for the game, and then when they lose them, they encourage them to buy more. Are we actually seeing a massive gambling problem under the radar that we don't necessarily identify as gambling?
Yeah, I mean, what I really need to say is that my biggest issue is with online gambling. If someone can go into a bookies, into a casino, can place a bet and is able to walk away having not lost their livelihood and it's controlled, I haven't got a problem with that. I myself went to a race course a couple of weeks ago and I placed a bet. No problem at all with that. What I worry about is the online, which is a 24-hour, 7 days a week scenario. This is where children get caught up. What you're talking about, Mercy, is things like loot boxes and skin betting, where kids are participating in what is speculative spend, and it's normalising gambling as an activity. It says this is a fine thing to do. There are over 60,000 problem gamblers in this country, aged between 11 and 16. That is what we're dealing with at the moment. We've created the next generation of problem gamblers. We have to change the regulations and the legislation.
All right, I'll lob it back over to you, Christopher, because there's one bit that I'd like your view on. I suppose one argument for regulating the gambling industry more, which I'm kind of naturally not inclined to want to do, but is that actually it isn't really regulating itself, in my opinion. They have been caught on numerous occasions, numerous different companies targeting people that they were known to be problem gamblers. I suppose that is a case for more regulation, isn't it?
Well, it's difficult to define what that means, targeting problem gamblers. I mean, problem gamblers will, unfortunately... problem gamblers will basically lose all their money sooner or later. That's the reality of it. And there are problem gamblers in every country. The number of problem gamblers in the country is not remotely linked to the amount of regulation in the country. You've got some countries where gambling is basically banned, like China, where you have very high rates of problem gambling. We've got relatively relaxed regulation of gambling, and we've got actually quite low rates of problem gambling. And they haven't risen, the rates of problem gambling, since we started measuring it over 20 years ago. And rates of gambling amongst children have gone down. Rates of gambling, just in general, just participation in gambling, have gone down in the last 20 years, despite the fixed odds betting terminals that Carolyn was moaning about until quite recently, despite online gambling, despite the legalisation of gambling advertising.
Sorry, can I just stop you there? Because I'm not sure Carolyn does agree with the figures you've just quoted there, so I just want her to reply to those.
No, it just amazes me that when I was fighting for the fixed odds betting terminals, Mr. Snowden was criticising me and saying I should draw my attention to online gambling because that's where the problem was. Now I'm doing that and I'm still not doing nothing right. I'm afraid Mr. Snowden has swallowed the BGC playbook on this one and he's repeating exactly what he's been told to repeat. I know what I'm doing is the right thing. I'm totally convinced that we need to prevent any further harm. And I'm not on my own on this. There's far more people are fed up of advertising, are fed up with the way the gambling companies behave, and are willing, ready, and able to actually protect those. They're not gambling out of want, they're gambling out of an addiction. It's a mental and a public health problem. And the sooner people acknowledge that, the better this place will be.
All right, Christopher, go on. Give a reply to that.
Well, what I actually said is if you ban fixed odds betting terminals and people will play the same games online, and that wasn't in itself a problem for the gambler, it's more a problem for the industry. So we've had thousands of bookmakers close and thousands of people lose their jobs as a result. Now, maybe some of those jobs have gone online to UK companies, but I suspect a lot of them won't have done. But that was the issue there. The question is, have we got fewer problem gamblers as a result of banning fixed odds betting terminals? Are people spending less money on these kind of games? Not as far as I can tell. We were told that 2 people are killing themselves every day as a result of problem gambling. A statistic that had no evidence when I looked into it, by the way. How many are killing themselves now? The fixed odds betting terminals were the crack cocaine of gambling. So presumably since they were banned 2 or 3 years ago, we've seen a huge improvement in this problem. But I'm not hearing anything about that. Apparently things have got worse. Now we've got to control online. And if we control online, I bet you that Carolyn is back in a few years' time saying we need to control, I don't know, bingo or the lottery or scratch cards or something.
OK, all right, well, I mean, there's a lot of...
Free market take, Chris.
OK, I didn't quite catch that, but I think we have actually got time. We actually have to go. I'm very sorry. Guys, I would actually really love to have it out all day with you two. I thought it was a really, really good debate. Thank you both very, very much. You've got Labour MP for Swansea East, Carolyn Harris there.